Hi everyone. This talk has been actually kind of sparked by a visit I had, or a talk I gave at the Dutch National Police headquarters, where I got a lot of empirical, like of course anecdotal, I didn't get the data, but a lot of anecdotal, evidence for shifting my mind a little bit about conspiracy theory. And the shift consisted mostly in trying to, be more concerned of conspiracy floaters, as I like to call them, or conspiracy followers, instead of the Alex Joneses of the world. Fuck him, he's not what is interesting, I think. I think in situations where conspiracy theories, we always think that they can have dangerous consequences. It's in those cases that we have to appeal to not the people who have earn a lot of money with spreading these conspiracy theories, but just with the people at home, on their computer, whatnot. So this talk will be kind of in the spirit of that. So keep that in mind, please. The case I first want to discuss is one rather remarkable thing that happened in Dutch politics on September 21st of last year. It was that in the middle of a debate on the national budget, the entire cabinet was seen leaving the House of Representatives. And this had never ever happened before in the Netherlands, so it was quite a deal. The reason that the cabinet left was that one right-wing politician, also a party leader, by the way, advanced a conspiracy theory about one of the ministers of finance, and it's not the minister as in the church minister, but in the House of Representatives minister. This right-wing politician is Thierry Baudet, and he claimed that the minister of finance at the time, Sigrid Kaag, was recruited to spy for a cabal of secret world leaders, or the deep states. During her studies at Oxford, which is, according to Baudet, a spy college. On hearing this, Kaag first left the House of Representatives and then was quickly followed by all the other members of the cabinet. The Minister of Housing and Spatial Planning and former Minister of Health during the Corona pandemic, Hugo de Jonge, accused Thierry Baudet afterwards of conspiracy madness that has no place in Dutch politics. And Prime Minister Mark Rutte, on re-entering on his own, the whole cabinet stayed outside, he re-entered on his own, said the fact that members of this house can sometimes be seen to push the limits of decency in debate befits democratic deliberation. However, at the moment one of the members of the parliamentary debate is accused of being involved in such a conspiracy, a line is crossed, and this I find unacceptable. The president of the House of Representatives, who's meant to keep everyone a little bit in check and see to that the regulations and whatnot are followed, demanded that Baudet would take his words back because they were not in line with the procedural regulations, namely, according to which you cannot personally attack someone during a national or political debate. Baudet refused, and on that the president of the House, she deprived him of the right to be present for the rest of the day. So Baudet is a party leader also, who was on an important day politically, no longer welcome to partake in the debates. Well, this is of course all very dramatic and whatnot, but what do I think is an interesting story to tell about this case? I think it shows us that sometimes appeal to a conspiracy explanation by someone causes others to instantly terminate the possibility of reasonable debates, shutting the door in someone's face, so to say. So in other words, the advancement of a conspiracy theory sometimes has the effect of deadlocking otherwise open-ended or even benign discussions, and the effect is often then polarizing, where on entering the debate, the members of the House of Representatives were still willing to consider each other's contributions. After the conspiracy theory was thrown in the mix, this was no longer the case, right? And even after having the recess of 15 minutes where everyone could calm down a little bit, Baudet refused to take back his words, and the cabinet refused to re-enter the discussion as long as Baudet was still in the room. And in the Netherlands, you know, I mean, there's of course a lot of crazy politics that happens around the world. In the Netherlands, we've had our share too. Like we've had a lot of people, you know, scream a lot of weird, crazy, dangerous things, but never had it, you know, elicited a response as strong as this one. And that made me wonder, why is it that conspiracy theories can have this power, you know, to elicit such a strong response? Then I'll look at the conspiracy theory induced polarization, which I will later connect back to this case. The concepts, one at least. Conspiracy theory induced polarization, as I understand the term here, and this is still work in progress, so if you have any suggestions, that'd be awesome. The tendency for members of a group discussing an issue, in this case a conspiracy theory, to move toward a more extreme version of the positions they held before the discussion began. Still pretty minimal, I may need to add a little bit of body to it. But okay, a conspiracy theory induced polarization. So a little bit of context is are cases where the promotion of a conspiracy theory causes a divide, right? Between, I think, two incongruous positions, namely where one party says this conspiracy explanation is worthwhile or it's true or whatnot. It's, you know, I'm allowed to appeal to it, and the other position says no. By appealing to a conspiracy theory, you're making an invalid and futile act of shifting the debate in a reasonless direction, and often that means that you're not a reasonable person at all anymore. The moment someone, you know, promotes a conspiracy theory, it's shutting the door and you're out of the reasonable debate kind of picture. Now, in philosophy, we haven't really looked at conspiracy theory induced polarization, even though that seems to me a little bit odd, because I think what often in the media is actually like the main point is that conspiracy theories are mad, bad, and crazy because they have this, you know, societal function. If no one really, you know, bothered about people believing them, then why care so much about the philosophy of conspiracy theory? So I'm very much wanting to make some kind of progress in the understanding conspiracy theory induced polarization. So after considering cases like the one above, and I will come back to another case as well, where appeal to a conspiracy explanation by someone causes others to instantly terminate the possibility of reasonable debates, I will look into assertions. Okay, when you find yourself in a controversial conversational context, even if you're an unwilling or contingent listener, as you probably are now, about any topic, it may be the case that you find the speaker to be overly confident in their assertions about some claims. Assertions, it has been argued, convey or have more epistemic weight than other kinds of locutionary acts, which can be brought to bear on disagreement between two parties. I take Stallmaker's account, but in a very kind of in a loose, I hope, way. But I think that with Stallmaker, assertions dynamically interact with the presuppositions underlying a conversation. So on Stallmaker's view, the propositions presupposed in a conversation are those that belong to the common ground. So if Nina and I are talking, we make claims, or if we make an assertion, that assertion should be in some way in line with the common ground that we both agree on. And this common ground doesn't need to be the things that we believe, can also be the things that we accept. Like, okay, for the sake of argument, let's say A is true, then what? You know, that's so to presuppose something is to take it for granted, or at least to act as if one takes it for granted as background information, as common ground among the participants in the conversation. And what is presupposed then, of course, has an influence on the new utterances that are going to be a part of the conversation, right? So if if we're having a conversation, the common ground kind of sets the stage and limits it to, right? And the idea is roughly that when someone asserts, let's say P, they do so against the background of the shared presuppositions and suggesting adding P to that common ground by asserting it, not by just promoting it or, you know, suggesting it, by asserting it. And then this account of Stalnaker I supplement with an account from that year, which is an addition to Stalnaker, and to see when or which kind of norms govern whether an assertion is appropriate or not. And he says the following: whether it is appropriate to assert P in a context depends not only on what one actually knows, believes justifiably, etc., but instead on whether one can legitimately represent oneself as knowing, given the common ground of the conversation, or more minimally, those elements of the common ground that are either true or recognized assumptions in the relevant context. Right? So if I make an assertion, then the appropriateness of me asserting that proposition depends on the common ground. Yeah? What's more is that if I make an assertion, and this is very small, but I commit to that claim, right? I'm confidently saying that this is the case, or at least that I believe that this is true, and that there's therefore a good reason to add it to the common ground. Now, back to conspiracy theory. I think there are cases in which we either perceive someone as asserting a conspiracy theory, or they actually are asserting a conspiracy theory. And I think the Baudet case is a perfect example. So when Baudet confidently claims that Sigrid Kaag was a spy for the deep state, and the House of Representatives asked him to take his words back, he refused, right? It was something that he claimed was true, and he wasn't going to refute himself afterwards. Knowing what we do now about assertion, or at least a little bit of context I gave you, we can also understand why this assertion did not stand with the cabinets. But that assertion was inappropriate because it didn't fit their common ground to a certain extent. As Stalnaker explains, to assert something incompatible with what is presupposed is self-defeating. And the common ground, I think, like would be uncontroversially at the background is something like, you know, only discussing in debates or only asserting those kinds of claims that are relevant to the debate, right? So only nationally and politically relevant claims. And there's no room for other stuff. That's like the rules of that conversation. And sensing such an indiscretion from Baudet's side, by the cabinets, it's only logical that they are like, if you don't understand what the common ground is, you've been a politician for a long time, then you're not a reasonable person. If you don't understand that these are the rules by which we play, then you should be disbarred from participating in the conversation in the first place. So that's what I did. But then I wondered, why would Baudet, knowing what he does, he's, you know, he knew what the response probably would be, right? So as a politician, why would he still have professed the conspiracy anyways? And I think that has to do with the fact that there is an important difference between different audiences. So normally the appropriateness of an assertion that depends on the common ground is established in the conversation I have with an audience, right? So it's me and the audience that should have the same common ground, and that's what makes the assertion appropriate or not. But the House of Representatives were, of course, not Baudet's real audience. The political debate was video taped. I don't know if that's an old-fashioned word, but whatever, or YouTube. And by saying this, he wasn't actually making an inappropriate assertion at all, like from his point of view. He was making an appropriate assertion, just not to the audience in front of him, but to the audience of people that share his idea that there is something very fishy going on in Dutch politics. Let's see. And what to do about this? it kind of explains why Baudet would still do it. It also explains why, even though the cabinet thought that it was an inappropriate assertion because there was no common ground, remember the common ground was that in the debate only nationally and politically relevant topics got discussed. But if this were true, right? If Sigrid Kaag, and I definitely don't believe that it is true, but if Sigrid Kaag was a secret spy for the deep state, for these people, you know, who believe that, it would be a nationally and politically very much relevant proposition. And so I think there's a discrepancy between considering whether or not some assertion may seem so ludicrous to us that the whole cabinet leaves the house, while it entices other people to say, see, if we make only one remark, they just leave, they shut the door. What's the upshot of all of this? I want to be kind of careful here. First, yeah, the context sensitivity of assertions can be quite broad because it depends on its various audiences. Not a very sexy conclusion, but still. While we may think it's straightforward nonsense what Baudet is saying, others will disagree. And by terminating the discussion with Baudet, we are in fact terminating the conversation with all people who share his presuppositions that the government may be deeply untrustworthy and corrupt, which is in the Netherlands about 1 in every 170 people. And this should, I think, even if completely unwarranted, you know, kind of still concern us, especially if segregating this group based on their ideological standing has a very much polarizing effect. If no one is willing, you know, to look past their own presuppositions and not necessarily engage with the other common ground, but at least consider their perspective. If no one wants to do that anymore, then I think echo chambers are a logical and not like a, you know, a flimsy, but a logical next step. If we shut the door, then where do they go? You know, who are left to talk with? I definitely don't agree, but it's just something I want to point out. Okay, so now the other side of the story is that I think it also works the other way around, and this story is kind of very much related to Pat and what you were saying. Scientists also make a lot of assertions, right? So in the Netherlands, at least, during COVID, there were a lot of assertions made. I think Cedric also said it like 6 months, you know, yes, we need herd immunity, 6 months later, etc. For me, that's not strange at all, or at least that's, I think, what kind of epistemic flexibility, you know, shows. But it is all based on the common ground underlying that the government or other institutions or media or politicians can make these claims and assertions and not be expected that if they're wrong, they lose credibility, because we have the common ground that they're trying their best, right? They have good intentions. That's why we don't think it's that, you know, enormously, ridiculously problematic if they turn out not to be right in the first place. Right? We're willing, yeah, okay, the science was still under development. That might happen, you know, you might be wrong. And of course, you were all trying your best. But if you lose that common ground, if you were all trying to do your best and you have the best intentions, I'm not going to go into the, okay, really quick. The two claims were Omicron variation of COVID was going to be more contagious, and AstraZeneca vaccine used in the Netherlands was effective against COVID. Both turned out partially or wholly false. But what you saw on a lot of social medias was that people like clinged to these assertions, like with newspaper headlines. They showed this is what they said, and now they're wrong. You know, and it's kind of a way of immunizing these people who want to show, look, they're wrong. We've been right all along, you know. And I think that that should be kept more in the background of making these very politically salient assertions. So they should be more cautious about that. Okay, that was a bit quick, but Yeah, so my conclusion is not practical. I know that this has been a very much practice or real life oriented talk. My conclusion is not going to be practical because I'm still not a policymaker. So I think there are some other things that I can say, which is that we can focus on the particularities of conspiracy theory induced polarization and identifying the underlying sources. So, for example, these differences in common ground that are underlying disagreements. And there's a feature that may distinguish polarizing appeals to CTs, conspiracy theories, from non-polarizing appeals to conspiracy theories. Such as that, so if such appeals are assertions with where there's a common ground that's lacking, then it might be more polarizing than not. And then in Patrick Stokes' words, which was a response to my paper, so I also on polarization, so I wanted to end with that. Anyone who worries about the decline in trust in shared epistemic authorities would do well to understand the ways in which people have become alienated from society's knowledge-generating mechanisms and the forms of asymmetrical political and economic power relations and institutional failures that have led to our much decried post-truth condition. Also in line with Patrick. That's it, thanks.